My grandma left me out of her will. That was the moment I thought she stopped loving me. But then the lawyer pulled out a second envelope. And the words inside didn't just break my heart. They shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. I remember the day so clearly. It was a Tuesday, gray and drizzly, the kind of day that matched the heavy feeling in my chest. I was sitting in the plush, overly formal office of Harrison, Finch, and Howe, the family attorneys. The air smelled of old paper and expensive wood polish, a scent I had associated with my grandmother, Eleanor Vance, for my entire life. But today, it felt suffocating. My mother, Linda, sat beside me, her hand clutching mine so tightly her knuckles were white. Her face was a mask of strained composure, but I could see the storm raging in her eyes. Across from us, my Uncle Robert, my mother's older brother, sat with a smug look on his face that he wasn't even trying to hide. His wife, Aunt Patricia, was beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, though I didn't see a single tear. My cousin, Brad, Robert, and Patricia's son, was there too, looking bored and scrolling through his phone, the ultimate symbol of his generation's detachment. I was just Emma. Emma, the granddaughter who had spent every summer of her childhood at my grandmother's sprawling estate, Willow Creek. The one who had learned to bake her famous apple pie from scratch, who had helped her tend to her prize-winning roses, who had listened for hours to her stories about the old days. The one who had been there, holding her hand, in those final, quiet weeks. My grandmother and I shared a bond that I thought was unbreakable. She was my rock, my confidant, the one person in my family who truly understood me. So, when the lawyer, Mr. Finch, began to read the will, I wasn't worried. I knew, in my heart, that she would have taken care of me. I never expected to be left out, not in a million years. To my daughter, Linda, I leave the sum of $50,000. Mr. Finch's voice was monotone, droning on like a tired bee. And to my son, Robert, the sum of $100,000, as well as the controlling shares in Vance Holdings. My mother flinched. $50,000 was a pittance, a cruel joke. It was barely enough to cover her medical bills from the last few years. Robert, on the other hand, was practically glowing. Vance Holdings was the family business, a multi-million-dollar conglomerate. He was getting the entire empire, and my mother was getting peanuts. I squeezed my mother's hand back, a silent gesture of support. This was bad, but it was about to get worse. To my grandson, Bradley, I leave the sum of $200,000 and the lakeside property in Maine. Brad finally looked up from his phone, a lazy grin spreading across his face. He didn't even have the decency to look surprised. He knew, they all knew. I could feel a cold dread pooling in my stomach. I had been skipped over entirely. I was the only grandchild not mentioned. It was like a slap in the face, a brutal, public humiliation. I saw my mother's face crumple in disbelief. She turned to look at me, her eyes pleading for me to be okay. But I wasn't okay. I felt like I was drowning. "Is there any mention of Emma?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "Eleanor's granddaughter." Mr. Finch looked down at his papers, his expression unreadable. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. "I am afraid not, Mrs. Harrison. Miss Emma Vance is not named in this document." The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I stared at my grandmother's signature at the bottom of the will, a familiar, elegant scrawl that I had seen on birthday cards and letters my whole life. It was her, she had done this. She had left me out. Robert cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Well, I suppose that's that," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Mother knew what she was doing. She always had a mind for business. Emma, dear, I know this is a shock, but your grandmother was a very practical woman. Perhaps she didn't think you had the head for it." The patronizing tone made my blood boil. I had a head for it. I had helped my grandmother navigate the complexities of her estate for years, researching investments, organizing paperwork. I knew more about Vance Holdings than Robert ever did. I was about to say something, to unleash all the hurt and anger that was boiling inside me, when Mr. Finch held up a hand. "Please, everyone," he said, his voice a little louder. "I have not finished. There is one more matter." The room fell silent again. I looked at my mother, her expression a mixture of hope and dread. Could there be a twist, a secret trust fund for me, some kind of explanation? Mr. Finch reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed, cream-colored envelope. It was thicker than the other documents, and it had a single word written on the front in my grandmother's handwriting. For Emma. My heart leaped into my throat, so she hadn't forgotten me. My mother gasped, a sob of relief catching in her throat. I could feel the smug look on Robert's face falter. This was it. This was the explanation, the justification, the reason why she had done what she had done. This was my grandmother finally speaking to me from beyond the grave. "Miss Vance," Mr. Finch said, holding the envelope out to me. "Your grandmother instructed that this letter be read aloud, in the presence of the entire family, immediately following the reading of her last will and testament." I reached out, my hands trembling. The paper felt smooth and cool against my fingers. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the weight of her words. I looked at the faces around me. My mother, her eyes filled with tears of relief and anxiety. Robert, his jaw tight with suspicion. Patricia, her face pinched with curiosity. And Brad, looking slightly more interested now, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This was it, the second statement. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I broke the seal, the sound of tearing paper echoing in the silent room. I unfolded the letter, my eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. It was a long letter, 4 pages, covered in my grandmother's looping cursive. I started to read, my voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each word. "My dearest Emma," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then I have passed on. I am sorry that I had to do things this way, but I knew it was the only way to protect you. As you have just heard, I have left you nothing in my will. I know that must have hurt you deeply. I know you must be feeling betrayed, abandoned, confused. I can only imagine the pain that is in your heart right now. Please know, my darling girl, that my decision was never a reflection of my love for you. You have always been the brightest light in my life, the granddaughter who was more like a daughter to me. I have cherished every moment we have spent together, every secret we have shared, every pie we have baked in our old kitchen. You are my legacy, Emma. Not money, not property, but you. My love for you is infinite and unconditional. And that is precisely why I had to do what I did." I paused, tears welling in my eyes. My mother was crying openly now, and even Robert looked uncomfortable. I continued reading. "I am writing this second statement, Emma, to tell you the truth. The truth about this family, the truth about Vance Holdings, and the truth about your dear Uncle Robert. It is a truth I have been carrying with me for many years. A truth that has weighed heavily on my soul. I knew I could not take it to the grave with me. You deserve to know. It is a story of greed, of betrayal, and of a terrible, terrible crime. A crime that I have been complicit in hiding for far too long. I am old, and I am tired, and I have run out of time to make things right. That is why I am leaving this task to you. You are the only one in this family with the courage, the integrity, and the heart to do what is right. I have left you nothing in my will, Emma, because it would have put a target on your back. It would have made you a threat to Robert, and he is a dangerous man. By leaving you out, I hope to make you seem insignificant. I hope to buy you time. I knew he would be too busy celebrating his victory to pay you any mind. The real legacy is in this letter. The truth is your inheritance, and it is a more valuable and powerful weapon than any amount of money." A wave of nausea washed over me. What was she talking about? A crime? A dangerous man? This couldn't be about my Uncle Robert. He was pompous and greedy, sure, but a dangerous man? A criminal. I looked up at him, his face was pale, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. He knew what was in this letter. I could feel the heat of his panicked gaze. I looked back at the letter, my eyes scanning the next lines, my hands shaking violently. To truly understand, Emma, you have to go back to the year 1998. You were just a baby then, and your father, my son, your father, was still alive. His name was William, your Uncle Robert's younger brother. Your mother and father were so in love, they were going to be my successors. William had a brilliant mind for business, but he was also a good man, a kind man. He was everything Robert was not. Your father and Robert had a contentious relationship, always competing for my approval. But there was an unspoken agreement between them. William was my chosen heir. He was the one who would take over Vance Holdings. He was the one who would carry on my legacy. Your father, Robert, and I were in the early stages of a massive merger that would have taken Vance Holdings to a global level. It was a deal of a lifetime, a deal that would make us one of the most powerful companies in the country. But Robert had a secret that threatened to unravel everything. I paused, my breath catching in my throat. A secret? What kind of secret? Robert was gambling. He had amassed a huge debt, millions of dollars, to some very unsavory people. He was desperate. He was supposed to be the one to negotiate a critical part of the merger with our new partners. This was his chance to prove himself, to show that he was just as capable as your father. He had to get the deal done, no matter what. But he was in over his head. He was compromised. He had made a deal with a rival firm, feeding them information about our strategies in exchange for money to cover his debts. I didn't know about any of this, not at first. I looked at Robert again. His face was ashen. He was gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. My mother was staring at him, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. The night before the final negotiations, I read on, my voice barely a whisper, I overheard a phone call. It was Robert. I could tell by the fear in his voice. He was talking to someone. He was saying he had delivered the final piece of the puzzle and that the deal would now go our way. I thought he was just being confident, trying to negotiate a better deal for the family. But something felt off. The next morning, your father and Robert were in a terrible car accident. It happened on the way to the airport. They were driving together to a final meeting about the merger. A truck ran a red light and smashed into their car. It was horrific. The world went dark for our family. Your father was critically injured. He was in a coma for a week before he passed away. I was devastated. My world was shattered. And Robert survived with a broken leg and a few cuts and bruises. The police called it a tragic accident. I had no reason to doubt it, not then. I felt a sob building in my chest. My father, I never really knew him. I was only a year old when he died. My mother had always told me he was a good man, a kind man. It was the only thing I knew about him. But as the years went by, I started to notice things. Robert was too comfortable with my grief. He never seemed to mourn his brother the way I did. He took over the company with a cold efficiency. He stopped mentioning your father entirely, as if he had never existed. And then, a few years ago, I was going through some of your father's old belongings in the attic. I found a journal. Your father's journal. In the last entry, written the night before he died, he talked about his suspicions of Robert. He had discovered Robert was being followed. He had been approached by a man who claimed to have information that Robert was involved in some kind of shady deal. Your father was going to confront Robert the next day on their trip to the airport. He wrote that he was afraid, but that he had to do what was right. He said he had a feeling that Robert was capable of anything. The room was silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and my own ragged breathing. I looked up. Robert was staring at me, his eyes filled with a raw, primal fear. He looked like a cornered animal. Reading that journal, Emma, changed everything for me. I finally started to see the truth. The accident wasn't an accident. Robert saw his chance. He saw a way to get rid of the one person standing in his way, and he took it. He was in the car with your father when the truck hit. Was he driving? Was he distracted? Did he somehow orchestrate it? I will never know for sure. But I knew in my heart, that Robert was responsible for the death of his own brother, my son, your father. He murdered William for control of my company. A collective gasp went through the room. My mother let out a wail, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. She stood up, pointing a shaking finger at Robert. "You monster," she screamed. "You killed my husband, you killed William." Robert shot to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "This is insane. This is a lie, a fabrication by a senile old woman. This is why she left you out of the will, Emma. She was losing her mind. I was in that accident too. I almost died. How dare you?" But his voice was too loud, his protestations too frantic. He was a terrible liar. I could see the truth written all over his face. My mother had collapsed back into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Brad looked pale and shaken, his earlier smugness completely gone. Aunt Patricia was staring at her husband with a look of dawning horror, her hand covering her mouth. Mr. Finch cleared his throat, his face grim. This is a very serious allegation, Miss Vance. Do you have any proof? Anything more than a letter? I looked back down at the letter in my hand. My grandmother knew I would need proof. She had thought of everything. Dear Emma, I continued reading, my voice now steady with a cold fury I had never felt before. I know that a letter is not enough. Robert has gotten away with this for too long. He is a master manipulator. He will try to destroy this letter, to discredit me, to make you look like a fool. That is why I have put together a file of evidence, a file that contains everything. A copy of your father's journal, photos from that night, a copy of the police report, which I had re-examined by a private investigator. And most importantly, a recording of a conversation I had with Robert a few years ago. I knew he would see me as a weak, old woman. I knew he would be careless. I asked him, point blank, about what happened that night. I told him I knew about his gambling, about his debts, about his deal with the rival firm. I told him I suspected him of killing his brother. He denied it, of course, but I could hear the fear in his voice. I could hear the desperation. I recorded the entire conversation. It is in the file. I have hidden the file in the most obvious place, a place Robert would never think to look. The place where I always kept my most precious things. It is in the false bottom of my old jewelry box, the one that sits on my dresser in the master bedroom at Willow Creek. The one with the little ballerina that twirls when you open it. The one you loved so much as a little girl. I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. The jewelry box. I knew it so well. I had played with it for hours as a child, winding it up and watching the little ballerina dance. I left this letter for you, Emma, because I trust you. I am trusting you to bring your father's killer to justice. I am trusting you to save this family from the poison that Robert has infected it with. I know it's a heavy burden to bear, but I know you are strong enough to carry it. You are a Vance. You are my granddaughter, and I love you with all my heart. Use the evidence well, my darling. Expose the truth and restore honor to our name. Your loving grandmother, Eleanor. I finished reading the letter. The room was deathly silent. Everyone was looking at Robert. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. The mask had completely fallen from his face. All that was left was the desperate, cornered animal underneath. Robert, you killed your brother, my mother said, her voice filled with a terrible, cold certainty. You murdered him for money. It was an accident, Robert screamed, his voice cracking. I didn't mean for him to die, I just needed him out of the way for the negotiation. I paid the truck driver to sideswipe the car, to scare him, to delay him. It was supposed to be minor. Just enough for me to get to the meeting first. They weren't supposed to hit him that hard. I swear, I didn't mean to kill him. The confession hung in the air, thick and ugly. Everyone in the room was shocked into silence. He had just admitted it. He had paid someone to hurt his own brother. Brad stood up, his face a mixture of disgust and horror. Dad, what did you do? He whispered. Patricia was sobbing now, reaching for her husband. Robert, how could you? How could you do this to our family? Robert shoved her away, his face contorted with rage. Shut up, all of you. You have no idea what I've sacrificed. I'm the one who kept this company alive. I'm the one who made it what it is today. William was a weak, sentimental fool. He would have run it into the ground. He was our son. My grandmother's voice seemed to echo in the room, even though she wasn't there. And you killed him. I stood up slowly, the letter clutched in my hand. The evidence, the proof, it was all at Willow Creek. Mr. Finch, I said, my voice firm and clear, I need to go to Willow Creek. I need to retrieve that evidence. And I need you to contact the police. Mr. Finch nodded, his face grim. Of course, Miss Vance, I'll do so immediately. Robert lunged towards me, his eyes wild. You little bitch, he screamed. You think you can do this? You think you can destroy me? I'll kill you. I'll kill you just like I killed him. Brad and my mother jumped between us. Brad put a strong arm on his father's chest, pushing him back. Dad, stop, it's over. The door to the office burst open, and 2 police officers rushed in, followed by a third. Mr. Finch had evidently called them the moment Robert had started screaming. Robert was wrestled to the ground, handcuffed, and read his rights. He was still screaming obscenities as they dragged him out of the room, his voice echoing down the hallway until it faded away. The silence after he was gone was even more profound than before. My mother rushed to me, wrapping her arms around me, sobbing into my shoulder. I held her, my own tears finally spilling over. The weight of what had just happened was crushing. The truth was out. My father's killer was finally in custody, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a profound, aching loss. Later that day, we went to Willow Creek. The old house felt different, empty and quiet, filled with ghosts. I walked up to my grandmother's bedroom. The familiar scent of her lavender perfume still lingered in the air. I went to her old vanity and opened the jewelry box. The little ballerina twirled, playing a tinny, melancholy tune. I removed the velvet tray with the jewelry and felt around the bottom. Sure enough, there was a false bottom. I pressed down on it and it popped open, revealing a thick manila folder. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. It was all there, just as my grandmother had promised. Your father's journal, filled with his fears and suspicions. Photos, the re-examined police report, and a small digital recorder. I pressed the play button. I heard my grandmother's voice, calm and measured, and Robert's voice, defensive, then fearful, then finally broken. I did what I had to do, Mother. Can't you see that? I did it for the family, he said on the recording. You did it for yourself, Robert, my grandmother's voice replied. You killed your brother for money. It was an accident. I paid the driver to cause a fender bender, just to scare him. He wasn't supposed to get hurt. The words were damning. My heart ached for my grandmother, carrying this secret for so many years, watching her other son, a murderer, walk free. I had never known her strength, the true depth of it. A few months later, Robert's trial began. The evidence was overwhelming. The recording of his confession, my father's journal, the re-examined police report, and the testimony of the private investigator who had uncovered the connection to the rival firm. Robert was found guilty of manslaughter, conspiracy, and witness tampering. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. The family business was in shambles. The stock had plummeted. But my mother and I, along with the help of some loyal employees and a team of dedicated lawyers, started the long, arduous process of rebuilding. Vance Holdings would survive. It had to. It was my father's legacy, and my grandmother's. Brad and Patricia, shamed and humiliated by Robert's actions, retreated from the family. They moved away, trying to build a new life for themselves away from the scandal. I couldn't find it in my heart to hate them. They had been victims of Robert's evil too, in their own way. My mother and I grew closer than ever. We talked for hours about my father, about the kind of man he was. I finally felt like I knew him, through her memories and through the pages of his journal. We spent long days at Willow Creek, tending to my grandmother's roses, baking her apple pie recipe, and healing the wounds of the past. One evening, I was sitting in my grandmother's study, looking at a photo of her and my father. He had his arm around her, and they were both laughing. I traced the outline of his face with my finger. I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in months. I knew what I had to do. My grandmother's second statement, the letter she had left me, had given me the truth. But it had also given me a purpose. I needed to honor her legacy. I needed to honor my father's memory. I needed to make sure that the truth about Robert's crimes was never forgotten. I got up and walked over to my grandmother's desk. I pulled out a fresh piece of paper and a pen. I began to write. My dearest future grandchildren, I began, I am writing this to you so that you will know the truth. The truth about our family, the truth about the strength of our women, and the truth about the legacy of a woman named Allure Vance. It is a story of love, loss, and the unwavering power of the truth. It is a story of a family that was almost destroyed by greed and betrayal, but was saved by the courage of one woman who refused to let the darkness win. I want you to know about your great-great-grandmother, who was the bravest person I ever knew. And I want you to know about your great-grandfather, William, who was a good and kind man. And I want you to know that the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth fighting for. It is our family's greatest treasure. I stopped writing, a tear falling onto the page. The truth had been my grandmother's most precious possession. And now it was mine. It was our family's legacy, our inheritance. Not money, not property, but the truth. And I would protect it with my life. I would pass it down through the generations so that the story of Allure Vance, the story of her courage and her love, would never be forgotten. The rain had stopped outside, and a beam of golden sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the room. It felt like a sign. It felt like my grandmother, looking down on me, finally at peace. The truth was out. Justice had been served. And our family, though scarred and battered, would finally be able to heal. The months that followed Robert's trial were some of the most difficult of my life. The media had gotten wind of the story, and our family's private tragedy became public spectacle. Reporters camped outside Willow Creek, their cameras flashing like hungry eyes. They wanted interviews, photos, anything they could use to sell papers. My mother and I became recluses, hiding behind the tall iron gates of the estate, trying to piece together the shattered remains of our lives. Every morning, I would wake up, and for a brief moment, I would forget. Then the weight of everything would come crashing down on me again. My father was dead. My uncle was a murderer. My grandmother had carried this terrible secret for years. The house that had once been filled with laughter and warmth now felt like a museum of grief. But my mother, Linda, was stronger than I had ever given her credit for. She had spent 20 years mourning a husband she had lost too soon, and now she had to confront the fact that his death was not an accident. It was a deliberate act of cruelty by her own brother-in-law. I watched her transform from a grieving widow into a warrior. She started attending therapy sessions. She joined a support group for families of crime victims. She began to write, pouring all her pain and anger onto the pages of a journal, just like my father had done. One afternoon, about 6 months after the trial, I found her sitting in the garden, surrounded by my grandmother's roses. She was wearing one of Grandma Aliner's old sun hats, and she had a peaceful look on her face that I hadn't seen in years. "Mom," I said, sitting down beside her on the bench, "are you okay?" She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I think I am, Emma. For the first time in a long time, I think I really am." "What changed?" I asked. She looked at the roses, her fingers gently touching a bright red bloom. "I was thinking about your grandmother, about everything she went through. She knew the truth about Robert for all those years, and she never told anyone. She carried that burden alone to protect us, to protect you. I used to be angry at her, for leaving you out of the will, for not trusting me with the truth, but now I understand. She was trying to keep us safe. She was trying to give us time." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. She was the bravest person I ever knew. "Yes, she was," my mother agreed. "And she loved you more than anything in this world. You were her sunshine, Emma. You still are." We sat in silence for a while, watching the butterflies dance among the flowers. The garden had always been my grandmother's sanctuary, and now it was becoming ours too. I decided then that I would never let it fall into disrepair. I would tend to her roses, just as she had taught me. I would keep her memory alive. As the weeks passed, I threw myself into the work of rebuilding Vance Holdings. It wasn't easy. The company had been Robert's playground for 2 decades, and his corruption had infected every level of the organization. There were employees who had been loyal to him, who had profited from his schemes. They needed to be rooted out. There were contracts that had been signed under shady circumstances, deals that had been made with the rival firm that Robert had been feeding information to. It was a mess. But I had help. A team of forensic accountants, lawyers, and business consultants worked alongside me, digging through the wreckage of Robert's reign. We discovered that he had been embezzling money for years, siphoning funds into offshore accounts. He had been paying off the truck driver who had caused the accident, keeping him quiet with monthly payments. He had been blackmailing the rival firm executives, threatening to expose their involvement in the scheme if they ever spoke out. It was a web of corruption so deep and so tangled that it took us over a year to fully unravel it. But we did it. We uncovered every secret, every lie, every dirty deal. And when we were done, we handed everything over to the authorities. Robert's sentence was extended. He would never see the outside of a prison again. But the victory felt hollow. The money that Robert had stolen was gone, spent on gambling debts and lavish lifestyles. The company's reputation was in tatters. We had to start from scratch, rebuilding trust with our partners and clients. It was a long, slow process, and there were many days when I wanted to give up. One evening, when the weight of everything was becoming too much, I found myself in my grandmother's study again. I had been avoiding it for weeks, too overwhelmed by the memories. But that night, I needed to feel close to her. I sat down in her old chair, the leather worn smooth by years of use. I looked around the room, at the bookshelves filled with her favorite novels, at the desk where she had written so many letters, at the paintings on the wall that she had collected over a lifetime. My eyes fell on a small box in the corner of the room. I had never noticed it before. It was a wooden chest, intricately carved with a brass lock. I walked over to it, my heart pounding. I didn't have a key, but the lock was old and rusty. I found a paperclip on my grandmother's desk and managed to pick it open. Inside the chest there were more letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me. I sat down on the floor, my hands trembling, and began to read. "My dearest Emma," the first letter began. "I am writing this on your 5th birthday. You are such a little ray of sunshine. Today you helped me bake a cake, and you got flour all over your face. You laughed and laughed, and I thought my heart would burst with joy. I am so lucky to have you in my life. I wish your father could see you. He would be so proud." I felt tears streaming down my face. I opened another letter. "Dearest Emma, you are 7 now. You just started school and you were so brave. You didn't even cry when I dropped you off. You told me you were a big girl now. I cried, but I pretended I had something in my eye. I love you more than words can say." And another. "Emma, you are 10. Today we planted the roses together. You have a real gift for gardening. I think you got it from me. When I look at you, I see so much of your father. You have his kindness, his gentle spirit. But you also have my stubbornness. You are a perfect blend of the two of us." I read through the entire chest of letters, each one more precious than the last. My grandmother had been writing to me for years, documenting every milestone, every happy moment, every precious memory. She had been so afraid that Robert would find out the truth, that he would hurt me, that she had prepared a lifetime of love in secret. She had hidden these letters away, not knowing if I would ever find them. But she had written them anyway, just in case. I spent the rest of the night reading and crying. By the time the sun came up, I felt a profound sense of peace. My grandmother had been with me all along, in every letter, every memory, every moment we had shared. She had left me a treasure far more valuable than money. She had left me her heart. Inspired by the letters, I made a decision. I would write a book. I would tell the story of my grandmother's life, of her courage, of her love. I would tell the story of my father, of the good man he was, and of the injustice that had been done to him. I would expose the truth about Robert, not for revenge, but so that others could learn from our family's tragedy. The book took me 2 years to write. I poured everything into it, every memory, every emotion, every lesson I had learned. I called it The Second Statement, A Family's Fight for Truth. When it was finally published, it became a bestseller. People were moved by my grandmother's story, by her strength in the face of unimaginable pain. They were inspired by my mother's resilience, by her ability to forgive and move forward. They were outraged by Robert's crimes, and they found hope in the fact that justice had ultimately prevailed. The money from the book allowed us to fully restore Willow Creek. We turned it into a center for families affected by violent crime, a place where they could find support and healing. My mother ran the center, and I helped out whenever I could. It was a way to honor my grandmother's legacy, to turn our family's pain into something positive. Life went on. I met a wonderful man named Daniel, a journalist who had interviewed me about the book. He was kind, patient, and he understood my complicated past. We fell in love, and a few years later, we got married at Willow Creek. The roses were in full bloom, and it was the most beautiful day of my life. My mother walked me down the aisle, and I felt my grandmother's presence with me every step of the way. Daniel and I had 2 children, a girl and a boy. We named the girl Eleanor, after my grandmother, and we named the boy William, after my father. They grew up hearing the stories of their ancestors, learning about the strength and courage that ran through their blood. I showed them the jewelry box with the little ballerina, and I told them the story of the second statement. I wanted them to know the truth, to understand where they came from, and to be proud of their family's legacy. One evening, when I was about 40 years old, I was sitting in my grandmother's study, just like I had so many times before. The house was quiet, peaceful. Daniel was putting the children to bed. I looked around the room, at all the familiar objects, all the precious memories. My eyes fell on the old wooden chest where I had found the letters. I hadn't opened it in years. I walked over to it, my heart full of nostalgia. I opened the lid and looked inside. It was empty, except for one envelope at the bottom. I hadn't noticed it before. It was addressed to me in my grandmother's handwriting. But this one was different. It was sealed with red wax and it had a small inscription, "Open only when you feel lost." I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. My hands were shaking, just as they had all those years ago in the lawyer's office. "My dearest Emma," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means you have found the letters. I am so glad. I hope they brought you comfort as I intended them to. I know that life is not always easy, and there will be times when you feel lost and alone. I want you to know that I am always with you, in spirit if not in body. The love we shared is eternal, and it will guide you through the darkest of times. You have done so much, Emma. You have uncovered the truth about your father's death. You have brought Robert to justice. You have rebuilt the family business. You have written a book that has inspired thousands of people. And most importantly, you have kept our family together. You have honored my memory and your father's memory. I could not be more proud of you. But I want you to know that it is okay to let go. It is okay to move on. You don't have to carry the weight of the past forever. You have done your duty. Now it is time to live, to be happy, to embrace the future. Your father and I will always be watching over you, cheering you on. And we want you to know that our love for you is unconditional, endless, and eternal. With all my love, Eleanor." I folded the letter and held it to my heart. The tears flowed freely, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. My grandmother had been right. It was time to move on. It was time to live. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The roses were in full bloom, their colors brilliant in the fading light. I thought about my grandmother, my father, my mother, my husband, my children. I thought about all the love that had filled this house, all the memories that had been made within these walls. And I smiled. The truth had set us free. The second statement had been the key to unlocking our past, to confronting our pain, and to building a future filled with hope and love. My grandmother had given me the greatest gift of all, the courage to face the truth and the strength to carry on. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. The story of the Vance family was not a tragedy. It was a story of triumph. A story of love that had conquered hate, of truth that had conquered lies, of justice that had conquered evil. And it was a story that would be passed down through the generations, a reminder of the power of family, the power of love, and the power of the truth. I walked out of the study and into the kitchen, where Daniel was reading a bedtime story to Eleanor and William. I joined them, wrapping my arms around my family. I felt a warmth spread through me, a feeling of completeness. I was Emma Vance. I was a daughter, a granddaughter, a wife, a mother, and I was finally, truly at peace. 20 years later, I am an old woman now. My hair is gray, my face is lined with wrinkles, and my hands are arthritic, but my heart is full. I have lived a good life. A life filled with love, laughter, and purpose. My son William is now the CEO of Vance Holdings. He has taken the company to new heights, expanding into international markets and pioneering sustainable business practices. He is a good man, just like his great-grandfather. He has the same kindness, the same integrity, the same gentle spirit. I see my father in him every day. My daughter Eleanor is a writer, like me. She has published several books of her own, all about the power of forgiveness and the importance of family. She is married to a wonderful man, and they have 2 beautiful children of their own. She is the spitting image of my grandmother, and she has inherited her courage and her wisdom. The family center at Willow Creek is still thriving, helping hundreds of families every year to heal from the trauma of violent crime. My mother passed away peacefully a few years ago, surrounded by love. She lived to see her grandchildren grow up, and she died with a smile on her face, knowing that her family was finally whole. Brad, my cousin, reached out to me a few years ago. He had been in therapy, trying to come to terms with his father's crimes. He apologized for his behavior at the will reading, for being so detached and uncaring. He told me that he had been hiding from the truth for years, that he had been ashamed of his father and everything he had done. He had been estranged from his mother for years, but they were slowly rebuilding their relationship. I forgave him, of course. We were both victims of Robert's evil, and we had both been struggling to heal. We are still not close, but we have a mutual respect and understanding. Today, I am sitting in my grandmother's study, writing this final chapter of our family's story. The room is exactly as it was when she left it, a shrine to her memory. The bookshelves are still filled with her novels. The desk is still covered with her papers. The jewelry box with the little ballerina still sits on her vanity. I think about everything that has happened, everything we have been through. I think about the day I was left out of the will, the day I thought my grandmother had betrayed me. I think about the second statement, the letter that changed everything. I think about the truth, the painful, devastating truth that had been hidden for so long. And I think about the legacy that my grandmother left me. Not money, not property, but the truth. The courage to seek it, the strength to face it, and the wisdom to use it for good. I have spent my life honoring that legacy. I have raised my children to be honest and courageous. I have taught them the importance of family, the power of forgiveness, and the value of the truth. And I have passed down the story of Eleanor Vance, the bravest woman I ever knew. As I look out the window at the garden, at the roses that are still blooming after all these years, I feel a sense of peace. My grandmother is gone, but her spirit lives on. In the flowers, in the house, in the hearts of her descendants, and in the truth that she fought so hard to protect. My story began with a betrayal, a devastating loss, but it ended with justice, redemption, and love. It is a story of hope, a story of resilience, a story of a family that was torn apart by greed and evil, but that found the strength to heal. I close my eyes and I can almost feel my grandmother's presence. I can almost hear her voice, soft and kind, whispering in my ear. "Thank you, Emma. I am so proud of you." A tear rolls down my cheek, but it is not a tear of sadness. It is a tear of joy. The truth is out. Justice has been served, and our family, though scarred and battered, has finally been healed. The rain has stopped outside, and the sun is shining brightly. It feels like a sign. It feels like my grandmother, looking down on me, finally at peace. And I smile, knowing that our story will live on forever, in the hearts of my children, in the pages of my books, and in the enduring power of the truth.